Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library's Zoom presentation. We are honored tonight to host Walter Gable. He is the Seneca County historian. He's a lifelong resident of Seneca County, with the exception of the years he spent in college and graduate school at Syracuse University. And he has been our historian since 2003. So he has written many books, including one on the Seneca Army Depot, and he has written several newspaper articles and does podcasts for the local TV station. So we are very happy to have him present his PowerPoint presentation on the Sampson Naval Station. So good evening, Walter, and thank you so much for doing this for the library.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to deal with the history of the Sampson Naval Station, which is really the first part of an extensive program that would cover the whole history of Sampson, because it's the Sampson Naval Station during World War II. The facility will become Sampson Air Force Base during the Korean conflict. And then there's a lot more history in between those two times. And of course, after the Sampson Air Force Base closed, there's a lot of history. But I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share some information about Sampson Naval Station. To begin to talk about the history of the area before Sampson Naval Station was established in 1942, it is crucial to remember that the inhabitants of this area at the time of the American Revolution were Iroquois tribes, Haudenosaunee tribes, especially the Senecas. Because most of the Iroquois tribes did ally with the British in the Revolutionary War, in 1779, General George Washington ordered Generals John Sullivan and James Clinton to conduct an expedition up from Pennsylvania through the Finger Lakes. Washington directed it to be what became known as a scorched earth policy of complete destruction of the Indian villages and their crops and their fruit orchards in the paths that are shown on the map and will be shown more clearly in the next frame. This map shows the route of the Sullivan Expedition. In terms of Seneca County, you will note that this Sullivan Army came up near the east shore of Seneca Lake in what is today Seneca County. This historic marker makes reference to the Seneca Iroquois village called Candia, or Appletown. The major Seneca Indian village in present-day Seneca County that was destroyed in this Sullivan expedition was that of Candia in the Sampson area. This Candia Indian village was a flourishing village, growing corn and other crops, the infamous Three Sisters, and also producing fruit, especially apples. The Sampson Naval Station will be located in this general area. This is the Sullivan Expedition historic stone monument at Candia. The picture at right is actually an enlargement of the tablet that is on the stone monument shown specifically at left. I've enlarged it so that you can see more clearly the information contained on the monument. There are many of these Sullivan Expedition monuments throughout the Finger Lakes region, tracing the general path of the Sullivan Expedition and the destruction of the Indian villages in that path. This 1874 property map shows the names of the property owners at that time. The Candia Sampson area is shown in the red oval. The Sampson Naval Training Station was located primarily on Romulus lots numbered 86 and 93. This is a 1938 aerial view of the area. You will note that it looks primarily like farmlands. There were some cottages along the east shore of Seneca Lake, shown at the extreme left. The Candia Station on the freight route of the Lehigh Valley Railroad had actually closed down prior to the decision to build the Seneca Ordnance Depot in this area in 1941. The Candia Station was opened and quickly became a bustling site with the unloading of heavy construction equipment, construction supplies, with construction workers coming by train to build that Seneca Ordnance Depot in summer and early fall 1941. Construction workers at the Seneca Ordnance Depot continued into 1942, and then came the decision to build what became the Sampson Naval Training Station. And that meant that the Candia Railroad Station continued to have a thriving business throughout 1942. In this 1950 map at the left, you will note the location of both the Seneca Ordnance Depot and the Sampson Naval Training Station. The Seneca Ordnance Depot had been established in June of 1941. Its existence, I think, was probably a major factor helping the War Department to decide to establish one of its new naval stations nearby. You can note also the railroad line between the depot and the Naval Training Station. This is the freight line route of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, on which the Candia Rail Station was located. The map at the right is a current Seneca County highway map. Now to turn to some specific information about Sampson Naval Training Station. It was in May 1942 that the War Department announced that this naval training station would be built in the town of Romulus on the east shore of Seneca Lake. By that time, the United States was already several months formally into World War II. So it should not be surprising that the decision was made that this naval station would be constructed as soon as possible, 270 days. It was going to be the largest construction project in Seneca County history up to that point in our county's history. It was built to be a temporary facility. The buildings were designed and constructed to last an estimated 10 years' time only. In the 3.5 years that the naval station operated, a total of over 400,000 naval recruits, including some females, received their basic training here at Sampson Naval Training Station. The Naval Training Station added approximately 46,000 people to the Seneca County population at any one point. You have to keep in mind that in the 1940 census, the entire county population was only 25,732. So while this naval training station is in operation, the population of the county has much more than doubled. This is an aerial view showing many of the buildings of the Sampson Naval Training Station. In this aerial view, you see at the top the different sections where the naval recruits received their basic training. I've highlighted that with that arrow. At the bottom, you see the hospital building with a clear physical separation between the location of the training buildings and the hospital complex. Each of the lettered areas, such as G, F, E, D, C, was a separate training area with its own drilling field, its own separate drill hall, and its own several barracks buildings. Still one more aerial view. This one shows each of the lettered complexes for the training sites. You can easily see that for each of these training complexes, there was a large field, the drill field, surrounded by barracks and other buildings. At the very left, of course, you can see Seneca Lake. This naval training facility was named after Rear Admiral William Thomas Sampson. This followed the typical practice of the War Department, that any new military or naval facility would be named, if possible, after a local armed forces person. Rear Admiral Sampson was from Palmyra. He was a naval hero in the Spanish-American War. However, some very local people felt that the facility should have been named after Rear Admiral Andrew Dunlap of Ovid, New York. Several factors help to explain why this site in mid-Seneca County was chosen as one of the 3 new naval training facilities that the War Department desperately needed. Many of these criteria had been factors as to why the mid-Seneca County site had been chosen the previous year for the Seneca Ordnance Depot. I think The Seneca Ordnance Depot, having been successfully built in 1941, was the major contributing factor to explain the selection of the nearby Sampson site for a naval training facility. Like what had happened in 1941 for the construction of the Seneca Ordnance Depot, many property owners were forced off their property so as to make way for the establishment and construction of the Sampson Naval Training Station. Like for the Seneca Ordnance Depot site, there were farm families dispossessed. Not as many because it was only about 1/4 of the acreage of the depot. However, for the Sampson Naval Training Station, several owners of cottages along the east shore of Seneca Lake were dispossessed of those cottages. We do have some people who had been dispossessed in 1941 to make way for the Seneca Ordnance Depot that relocated to the Candaya area and were dispossessed again in 1942 to make way for the new naval training station to be constructed there. The dispossession of their property was a hardship for many people, including Charles Garrison, pictured here. He operated a general store in Candaya, and it was taken. And he said he was simply too old to start over again with a new business somewhere else. The local historians of Seneca County in 2012 raised money for this historic marker, and it was dedicated July 12, 2012. This historic marker honors the families that were dispossessed in 1941 for the Ordnance Depot and in 1942 for the Naval Training Station. On that day of dedication, and it was an extremely hot, uncomfortable July day, several descendants of dispossessed families were present for the ceremony, and at least 2 of actual members still alive of dispossessed families. This historic marker is located near the entrance to Sampson State Park, on property owned by the Sampson State Park on the east side of Route 96A. So it is located between the depot and where the Sampson base itself actually stood. "400 buildings to be constructed in 270 days. Each of the 6 training units had its own drill hall. Shown here is the construction of one of them. Because steel was so important for ships construction in the war, these drill halls, as well as the barracks, were constructed virtually entirely of wood. A drill hall had 62 laminated arches to provide the main structural support for the drill hall. A drill hall was 600 feet long, 120 feet wide, with a rise in the center of 45 feet. That drill hall would be approximately the size of 4 football fields. This was the largest construction project in Seneca County history up until that point. Like the situation for construction of the Seneca Ordnance Depot in 1941, the construction of Sampson Naval Station in 1942 required many construction workers, much more than in number than what the local labor supply could provide. Over 15,500 construction workers. Besides the construction of the drill halls and the barracks, there was other kinds of construction, what I guess we would call infrastructure, a term we're hearing very much in the news today. Here you see rolls of electric cable for the additional electrical service that was going to be needed for this naval station. This shows the actual installation of electric service being done by workers up on a pole. Sod was brought in from the Backbone Ridge area of southern Seneca County, northern Schuyler County. Sod that would be used to provide as soon as possible nice grassy fields for the outside drilling of the recruits. With as many as over 15,000 construction workers, there were lines of workers in line to get paid on payday. Those construction workers who were single frequently slept on mattresses en masse in some buildings in nearby Geneva. This provided cheap sleeping arrangements, enabling these young men to wire home to their parents more of their paycheck. Many workers who had families lived in trailers at the Waterloo Fairgrounds, the county fairgrounds. Here you see several barracks in one of the training units. In the right of this picture, you see those housing barracks. Note how they're wood. At the left, you see just the end portion of a drill hall. Not all of the Sampson Naval Station facilities construction was completed when the facility was formally opened on September 17th, 1942. September 15th, excuse me. This fact gives us some understanding of just how fast the War Department was moving to begin training naval recruits at Sampson. At the south end of the Sampson Naval Station, a huge hospital complex was built. It consisted of several one-story wooden buildings connected by enclosed corridors. This picture shows some of those hospital buildings. Waves were very important to the successful operation of the Sampson Hospital. On the bus at the lower left, note the advertising to join the waves on the side of this bus transporting the waves. This is a view of a typical patient ward, not the private rooms that we think of as hospitals today. Here we see a naval recruit in the foreground with several hospital buildings in the background. Naval recruits coming to Sampson received this book providing information about the Sampson facility. Here we see a picture with a rather humorous caption depicting civilians arriving at Sampson to undergo naval recruit training. Many came by train, many came by bus. Upon arrival, each naval recruit underwent a complete physical. To receive the required haircut took several barbers to handle all of the recruits. A pamphlet called the Recruit Beacon was given to each naval recruit with the assumption that it would be mailed home to loved ones. You can see at the upper left how it was all set for return address and mailing address to be added to the outside cover. This gives us a good idea of the clothing that was issued to each recruit and how that clothing was to be stored properly in the recruit's locker. Very strict procedures. The typical day for a recruit at Sampson began with reveille at 5:45 a.m. or 05:45 hours and ended by 21:30 hours. On Sunday, however, reveille came 45 minutes later in the morning. An obvious part of the recruit training was swimming instruction. Each of those training units had its own huge pool. Classroom instruction of all kinds was very important. Exercising and conditioning was also very important. Here you see the interior of one of those large drill halls. Drilling was also very important. In inclement weather, the large drill hall provided lots of room for drilling when it couldn't be done outside on the drill field. Here you see some examples of outside drilling. Learning how to row a boat as a team effort was also very important. Before rowing on the water, however, recruits honed their rowing skills on land, learning how to do it as a team effort. These recruits don't look like they are working very hard. But if you do this rowing for many miles, you wouldn't look happy like these recruits. They're happy because they are actually on their way for some leave time, a few hours in nearby Geneva. Life on a ship was simulated as much as possible. The use of 600 hours, for example, Navy time. Here you see training in the steering of a ship. There are lots of postcards about Sampson Naval Station, and this postcard shows a drill review. This is a close-up of the color guard in a drill review. Here is a flag event portion of a drill review. Note Seneca Lake in the background. Imagine how the winds sweeping over that lake on a cold winter day must have been felt by those new naval recruits coming from the deep south, where they might never, ever had previously seen snow. This is a more relaxed time in a drill review. Notice the big drill hall in the background, upper left. Here you see typical barracks. Let's go inside. Here you see in the barracks the rows of the bunk beds. To complete naval recruit training, approximately 6 weeks or so, each recruit had to pass a rigid final inspection. Here, the final inspection is taking place. This recruit has passed his final inspection. He's got his duffel bag on his shoulder, and he's been given a pair of gloves, and you notice the smile on his face. He's getting ready to leave Sampson. While the Naval Training Station was operating, we had many famous people who visited the Sampson Naval Training Station. Here are a few. Upper left, Bob Hope. Upper right, singer Marian Anderson. Center, screen star Ida Lupino. Lower left, boxer Gene Tunney. Lower right, Joe Louis. Today, with our cell phones, which give us 24/7 contact with loved ones and friends, makes it so easy for us to take this convenience almost for granted. Given that reality, it is perhaps more difficult for us to imagine just how difficult it was when many naval recruits simply had to wait their turn to make a phone call with very limited number of phones available. The naval recruits sent and received a huge amount of mail. This postcard, I think, humorously shows how the Blue Jackets enjoyed washing dishes. Church services for Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish faiths were held in the two chapels on site. However, for larger church services, either Sullivan Auditorium or a drill hall could be used. Then on July 4th, 1943, a pontifical mass was held on the lakeshore so that 20,000 Blue Jackets and civilians could attend that one service. Sampson Naval Training Station had a tremendous impact upon the city of Geneva. That effect is discussed very well in text and photos in the book Geneva and World War II that has been published by the Geneva Historical Society. Geneva was the Liberty town for the Sampson Blue Jackets. This meant that the bars and grills were full on Saturday nights. It also meant lots of business for the restaurants and stores. However, there were some negative impacts, such as the greatly increased traffic, housing shortages, inflation prices, difficulties in keeping the Blue Jackets away from the female students at William Smith College. Geneva also was the site of the USO for the Sampson Blue Jackets. It was located on the southeast corner of Main and Seneca Streets. Here are some artifacts that various people have shared with me. These items were all in use at the Sampson Naval Training Station at some point. Some very interesting men received their basic naval blue jacket training at Sampson. Clearly, one of these is William Patrick Hitler, the nephew of Adolf Hitler. William fled Germany when his uncle Adolf demanded that he become a German citizen. After many efforts to join the Allies' military forces, he was accepted into the U.S. Navy, receiving his training here at Sampson. He said in an interview he looked forward to helping bring about the defeat of his uncle Adolf. Victor Heimovich Jr. was living with his parents and sibling in Shanghai, China, because his father worked for the International Harvester Company base of operations there. When the Japanese attacked China, he and the family members were taken prisoner. In December 1943, he was part of a prisoner exchange. He then enlisted in the U.S. Navy, received his naval recruit training at Sampson starting in January 1944. Then we have this interesting father and son combination. The father, Joseph Martin, and his son, Thomas Martin, both received their training at Sampson Naval Station. Joseph, the father, had served in World War I, thought he would never be involved in military service in another war. However, his son, John, came up missing in a plane fight during World War II, prompting younger son, Thomas, being determined he was going to enlist. When son Thomas was going to enlist, Father Joseph decided he would also enlist. Son Thomas had to start as a basic recruit, but Joseph the father was made a seaman second class right from the beginning. At the end of World War II fighting, this quickly built Sampson Naval Training Facility, which had been designed to be only temporary, came to an end in terms of naval training. The facility, however, did become a separation center, processing thousands of armed forces personnel out of military active service. Eventually, several of the no longer needed large drill halls were purchased by different colleges and used as college field houses. Imagine dismantling one of these large drill halls and then reassembling it on the college campus. Sampson Naval Training Station played a major part in over 400,000 naval recruits who were part of what Tom Brokaw has called the greatest generation. This historic marker, recently refurbished by the efforts of the Seneca County Board of Supervisors. This historic marker stands next to the main entrance to the present Sampson State Park. Many of the buildings of the Sampson Naval Training Station became part of Sampson College. Sampson College was part of the post-World War II college boom because so many war veterans were taking advantage of the educational benefits under the GI Bill. Here's my contact information if you want to contact me after tonight's presentation or in the near future for further information. We are going to deal with questions that you may have already been posing in the chat room. I hope that you have enjoyed this program on Sampson Naval Training Station. It's the first part of the story of Sampson. Other parts would deal with Sampson Air Force Base and Sampson after the Sampson Air Force Base. I think we're ready for questions.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any questions. So again, to the audience, I'll ask that you leave your questions in the chat box from the bottom of your screen. Someone did mention that they had heard that one of the drill halls was reused as a barn near Batavia in Genesee County.
That could very well be. I don't have documentation about that, however, but that doesn't mean that it isn't true.
All right, and we have a question. Did the Air Force take over immediately after the Navy had vacated?
No. When Sampson Naval Station closed, as I say, many of the buildings became Sampson College, which only operated until June of 1949. The hospital, the Naval Hospital area, became part of Willard State Hospital, the Willard Asylum. And then and there were some other uses for other parts of the facility. With the outbreak of the Korean War, the federal government said, we're going to open this facility as an Air Force base. So Willard Hospital had to turn back at the hospital portion, and it was established into an Air Force Base hospital, a very large one. The buildings, as I had indicated, for the Naval Station were only designed to be temporary, lasting 10 years. They hadn't been maintained, many of them, after the closure of the Naval Base and the college. And so windows were broken, and a lot of rehabilitation had to be done to these wooden structures to get it operational as an Air Force base.
All right. It looks like we have another question asking, was the base co-ed for the barracks, or were men and women separated?
There certainly wasn't co-ed during World War II, and I don't think there was any co-ed when it was the Air Force Base operation. I've certainly never heard anything of that. You know, that if there was concern about keeping the Blue Jackets on leave away from the female students of William Smith College in Geneva, I think you can understand, you know, how mingling of the sexes, it was going to not be as it might be today.
All right. It looks like we have another question. Why was the hospital so far away from the base?
Well, interestingly, it followed, I think, a common practice that number one, hospital complexes of the new facilities being built during World War II were called the Q area, which also the word quarantine begins with the letter Q. And so the physical separation probably, you know, was a part of the belief, you know, that it obviously would prevent a lot of spread of infectious diseases, whatever, and so on. Of course, there was a large area that was the base, and so therefore they could really physically separate the hospital area extensively from the training bases area.
All right. It looks like we have a question. Are the maps of the farms that were moved into Romulus available?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
It's asking if the maps of the farms that were moved into Romulus, in example, William O'Mara and Patrick O'Mara, are available.
Interesting question. I've not ever seen a map showing the property owners of the naval facility at the time that the War Department took over for Sampson Naval Station, unlike the maps that I do have of the property owners for the depot for the previous year. I imagine such a map probably doesn't exist, but or does exist, excuse me, but I haven't seen such a map.
All right, we'll take any final questions. That looks like all we have for now, but if we have any final questions, I ask that you put them in the chat box now.
Quite a few.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions. So
I
I'll
saw
turn
quite
it
a
back
few.
to Monica.
Okay.
Are you all set, Monica?
Yeah, I'm going back here.
All right, it looks like your video and audio is all set, Monica.
Okay. I thought I saw some more questions, Harrison. That's what I wasn't sure. I thought I saw 8 questions, but let me see the side by side options. All right. Well, I guess I just had one question. I know, Walter, they weren't given a great deal of notice. I remember seeing articles in the Ovid Gazette, and there was just one article saying that the possible naval base training station is kind of rearing its head, and then all of a sudden, within a few weeks, the homeowners were told to move. So
Yes, and complicating is the fact that these tended to be summer cottages, you know, for those property owners. And so if a notice got posted on their cottage door, you know, because they didn't have a local, you know, a more permanent mailing address necessarily, the cottage owners could be quite surprised to see when they do come to the cottage finally, and that a notice that they have to vacate in a much more reduced amount of time even.
yeah, no, it was just amazing to see the headlines week to week. You know, one week it was like there's the possibility of this naval training station, and then the next week there's the announcement, and then there's a week where it's like homeowners must leave by July or something to that effect. So
Yeah.
it's,
Well, you know, the US is in the war. We need this naval training station facility operational as soon as possible. Remember the parallel for the Seneca depot construction, that some few property owners where the first construction was going to take place were only given 3 days notice, formal notice to vacate.
oh. Well, I do thank you so much for this presentation. It was really very interesting. I know some persons, someone asked if it would be available, and we did record this session and hope to put it on our website so people can watch this presentation in the future. So I really appreciate that, and your knowledge and sharing that with the public, and it's such an important part of Seneca County history. So thank you so much, Walter Gable.
My professional pleasure.
Okay.